Greetings and welcome to LAT Chapter 3, Ethics in Animal Research. This had been part of a couple of other chapters. I've removed it so that it's a standalone to sort of help people absorb the information a little bit better. We're going to be discussing regulations in ethics, the importance of ethics, compliance in ethics, and reporting questionable animal treatment. The information from this PowerPoint can be found in the LAT Manual Chapter 3, so feel free to read along if you would like. It's important to know that when we are working with animals, we don't just get to do whatever we want. There are regulations, guidelines, policies in place that require that laboratory animals are treated ethically and humanely. Working with animals in research needs to be weighed against the benefits that are gained from the research. We know this as humans, we know this as research technicians, but there are also laws on the books that have been around for a long time. The first law in the United States actually came about in the 1600s. That's how far we have gone with our documentation for animal cruelty considerations. It's really important that we understand that animal models are valuable, mostly because there aren't replacements that are fully adequate. It's important to know that regulations require ethical and humane treatment, and it's important to understand that studying ethics helps researchers and technicians understand how they can be more responsible stewards of the research animals and of the research that they perform. We are required to not only provide proper husbandry and management, but to also care for the animals humanely. Why? Well, I mean, first of all, it's because we're good people and we would just do that anyway, but also because there's basis for it in law. There have been public concerns raised over the decades that have called for improved standards for laboratory animal care. In the 1960s, there were a couple of articles in different magazines, Life magazine specifically, that talked about the condition at animal dealers, as well as an experience where a Dalmatian named Pepper had been removed from her family's home and subsequently taken to an animal shelter and thus somehow got into a research facility. The family discovered this a little bit too late, and because of that, there was a lot of public outcry, and that led to the development of the Animal Welfare Act. The Animal Welfare Act isn't just a static book. It does get evaluated periodically. The 1980s issue with animals at a facility in Maryland caused it to be reassessed, and because of it, there were more standards added in 1985. And what are ethics? They're a broad concept that refer to the way that people behave, and those are based on cultural and community norms. So they are considered sort of a core value. We as a culture believe certain things, and because of that, we act in specific ways. Ethical treatment of animals demonstrates respect and compassion for the animals. The Guide for the Care and Use of Laboratory Animals mandates us to provide humane care, and humane care is defined as those actions taken to assure that laboratory animals are treated according to high ethical and scientific standards. Federal mandates require that we house animals in ways that benefit their well-being. Research facilities must ensure that procedures done on animals minimize or avoid discomfort, pain, and distress. The U.S. government principles for the utilization and care of vertebrate animals used in testing, research, and training was developed and is specifically applied to research facilities getting funding by federal grants, specifically like the NIH, which ONPRC gets grant funding from. and that policy addresses some specific ethical concerns. When a researcher decides to use animals, there's a lot of planning that goes into that decision. Again, we don't just do this willy-nilly. We have to consider alternatives, and we have to scientifically justify the work happening to the animals, the number of animals being utilized, how the animals are being housed. All of that must be justified. Working with animals in research is a privilege. We need to understand that there is value to their life. And this isn't just based on us, it's also based on our societal norms. We are expected as research facilities to be providing significant new knowledge, improving the health of human and animal, as well as responsible use of those animals. And at all times, the animals must be treated humanely. If pain can't be managed, humane euthanasia should be considered. In 1959, the 3R principle was published by William Russell, a zoologist, and Rex Birch, a microbiologist. They wanted to promote the development and practice of more humane experimental techniques and reduce lab animal distress. The 3 R's are based on replacement, reduction, and refinement. Replacement is trying to determine if animals could be replaced by a non-animal alternative or a less sentient species without interfering with the objectives of the study. That might be going to cell cultures or mathematical models, computer models, or what we see a lot of the times, using a zebrafish or a mouse instead of doing a project on a non-human primate or a rabbit. Reduction is where you are acknowledging that replacement isn't an option, but you are going to use the minimum number of animals needed to obtain valid information for that study. So, for example, perhaps a guinea pig reproductive study where you're using one uterine horn as an experimental model and the second uterine horn as a control. By doing that, you're able to reduce your number of animals by 50%. But also refinement. Can the procedures used in the study be refined to lessen pain and distress, or to minimize the number of potentially painful procedures the animal could undergo during the study? So is there a way of providing them pain meds in their water so that they have access to it all the time, or training the animals to perform so that they don't have to go into a transfer box and possibly a bleed tower? Maybe they can just perform a bleed at their cage. A thing to keep in mind: when you are judging the potential effect of any procedure, it should be assumed that what would be painful to a person is painful to the animals. With that, you also have to keep in mind very short-term discomfort, for instance, a blood draw or an injection. Yes, they do hurt people. They are uncomfortable, but it's not causing long-term pain or distress. It's momentary, and that's an important consideration. When it comes to ensuring that the actions in the vivarium are ethical, everybody walking into that facility is responsible, and that is to ensure that we are not having animals suffering. Why do we care? Well, it does in part give public trust that research is being conducted in an ethical and humane manner. Something to consider also are the endpoints. The Guide for the Care and Use of Laboratory Animals requires that endpoints be determined before a study even begins, and it needs to allow for a humane death. Many protocols require veterinary input if an animal is in distress but hasn't reached the listed endpoints. The veterinarian can always override in the animal's favor when there is an ethical consideration in play. Which is more important, compliance or ethics? Well, both of them are required, so they're both equally important. It's important also to know that treating animals ethically is more than just following the rules. The technicians in the facility are the eyes and the ears and need to tell a manager if something's wrong. Listen to your gut. Ask yourself, what I'm seeing right now, is that something that I'd want to see on the 5 o'clock news? Would you want your mom to see that on the 5 o'clock news? And if the answer to that is no, you are encouraged to and allowed to complain to appropriate people within the facility. Those complaints will then be investigated and then, as needed, corrective action taken. And I will talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. This is a walkthrough of what you could do as a course of action. But what's really important is knowing how to report concerns. If you ever question how an animal is being treated, determine if these things are being followed: the protocol, regulatory mandates, and institutional policies. If the answer to these questions is no, ask. Ask a supervisor, ask a manager, ask a lead, ask the researchers, ask the veterinary personnel. There might be a reason what you are seeing is not what you expected to see, and it could have scientific merit. Are you still concerned? If so, you can then talk to the IA cook. Per the guide and the animal welfare regulations, facilities are supposed to have a whistleblower policy. You should know how to report concerns. So for the OHSU staff, there's actually an integrity hotline. You can call this number. You can leave your name. You cannot leave your name. It is up to you. But our facilities absolutely take animal care and welfare seriously and do want to hear if there is ever a problem. If you don't know how to report those concerns, that needs to be your very next step before moving on to any other chapters.